Welcome to my Channel Deep Sleep Mission-DSM. As we begin, I would be delighted if you could share your location in the comments below. It's truly inspiring to witness how far this content travels and to connect with viewers from across the world. The coffee maker in the break room was still gurgling when I found it. Still hot, still half full. 47 people don't just vanish while their coffee is brewing. But that's exactly what happened at St. Mary's Memorial Hospital on the night of October 23rd. If you're listening to this in bed right now, maybe with your lights dimmed low, I need you to understand something. This isn't just another scary story. This is what I lived through. And by the end of this, you'll understand why I can never work another night shift again. But before I tell you what really happened that night, let me ask you this. Have you ever been completely alone in a place that should be full of people? That wrongness you feel? That's your brain screaming at you that something is very, very wrong. Hit that subscribe button if you want to hear more stories like this, because trust me, after what I'm about to tell you, you're going to have questions. Lots of questions. Now, let me tell you about the night an entire hospital shift simply disappeared. My name is Sarah Chen, and I was a float nurse at St. Mary's Memorial Hospital in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Float nurses, we're the ones they call when someone doesn't show up. We're the backup plan, the safety net. On October 23rd at 11:47 p.m., my phone rang. Sarah? The voice on the other end was Janet from staffing, but something was off. Her voice had this thin, stretched quality to it, like she was trying not to panic. We need you at St. Mary's now. I glanced at my clock. I wasn't scheduled. Janet, I just worked a double yesterday. I'm not due back until the entire midnight shift. She paused. I could hear her breathing. Quick, shallow. They're not answering. Any of them. What do you mean, they're not answering? I mean... Another pause. Longer this time. I've called 47 cell phones in the last 20 minutes. Not one person is picking up. Not one person. The drive to St. Mary's usually takes me 18 minutes. That night I made it in 12. The whole way there I kept telling myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe there was a meeting. Maybe the cell tower was down. Maybe. But when I pulled into the employee parking lot, my headlights swept across rows and rows of cars. All the midnight shift cars. Every single one of them. If everyone's cars were here, where were the people? The automatic doors whooshed open, and I stepped into the emergency department. The lights were on. The computers were running. But the silence... God, the silence was so thick I could taste it. Hello? My voice echoed off the walls. Anyone here? Nothing. I walked past the triage desk. There was a clipboard there with a half-completed intake form. The pen was still uncapped, lying across the paper like someone had just stopped. Mid-sentence, the timestamp read 11:30, 2 p.m. 15 minutes before Janet called me. The coffee maker in the break room was my next stop. That's where I found it still gurgling. Still brewing, a mug sat on the counter next to it. Steam rising. Lipstick mark on the rim. I recognized that shade. Rebecca always wore that shade of pink, but Rebecca wasn't there. Nobody was there. I need you to understand the layout of St. Mary's. It's not some massive city hospital. We're talking 3 floors, maybe 150 beds total. Small enough that on a quiet night, you know every soul in the building. Big enough that when it's empty, when it's really empty, every footstep sounds like thunder. I started in the ICU. If something had happened, if there'd been an evacuation, they would have taken care of the critical patients first, right? The automatic doors slid open with their familiar whisper. Bed 1, Mrs. Patterson. 83 years old, ventilator dependent. The machine was breathing for her. In, out, but her nurse, gone. The chair was still warm. I touched it, still warm, bed 2. Mr. Jeffries. Post-op cardiac. His monitors beeped steadily. Normal sinus rhythm. His IV bag was nearly empty, maybe 10 minutes left before it would need changing. But his nurse? Gone. I checked every bed, every patient was there, every patient was fine, but every single staff member had vanished. The medroom door was propped open. That's never supposed to happen. Never. Inside, the narcotic cabinet was open. Not broken into, just open. Like someone with the code had started to access it and then, what? Decided to leave? In the middle of pulling meds? My hands were shaking as I picked up the phone at the nurse's station. I dialed Janet's direct line. "Did you find them?" Her voice was barely a whisper now. "No. Janet, we need to call the police. Something's..." "I already did. They're on their way. Sarah, the other hospitals..." "What about the other hospitals?" I called around to see if maybe there was some kind of, I don't know, emergency that pulled our staff away. But Sarah, Mercy General, their midnight shift is gone too. So is Lutheran Medical. So is... The phone slipped from my hand. It clattered on the desk. I could still hear Janet's voice, tinny and distant, listing hospital after hospital. All missing their midnight shifts, all of them, at exactly the same time. I picked up the receiver. "Janet, I'm going to check the rest of the hospital. Maybe they're..." "Sarah?" Her voice cut through mine. "The security cameras. I'm looking at them right now. At 11:32, they all show the same thing." "What? What do they show?" "Nothing. At 11:31, everything's normal. People walking, working, living. At 11:32, she made a sound. Not quite a sob, not quite a laugh. At 11:32, the halls are empty, one frame to the next, like someone just edited them out. I hung up on Janet. I had to, because standing there, phone in hand, I heard something. Footsteps. Slow, measured, coming from the direction of the OR. "Hello?" I called out. "Is someone there?" The footsteps stopped. I waited, counted to 10, then 20. Nothing. The OR was on the second floor. I took the stairs. Each step echoed in the stairwell. At the landing between floors, I found a shoe. A single white nursing clog, size 7, the kind Rebecca wore. The OR doors required a key code. I punched it in. The locks clicked open. Inside, operating room 3's light was on. The door was cracked. Through the gap, I could see the edge of the operating table. I pushed the door open. The room was set up for surgery, instruments laid out, a sterile field prepared, but no patient, no surgeons, no anyone. Except, on the floor, arranged in a perfect circle around the operating table, were cell phones. Dozens of them, all face up, all showing missed calls. The screens lit up in waves as more calls came in. Families, friends, the staffing office, all calling, all unanswered. In the center of the circle on the operating table was a single piece of paper. Hospital letterhead. I walked closer. My footsteps sounded wrong, muffled, like the room was eating the sound. The paper had one line written on it. Handwriting I didn't recognize. Shaky, hurried. They came at 11:32. They'll come again at 3:33. I looked at my watch. 2:47 a.m., 46 minutes. That's when I noticed the smell. Ozone, like the air before a thunderstorm. But we were inside, climate-controlled. There shouldn't be any smell like that. The lights flickered just once. But in that flicker, in that split second of darkness, I saw them. Shadows where shadows shouldn't be, moving, reaching. And in that moment of darkness, I heard something that made my blood turn to ice. Whispering. Dozens of voices all saying the same thing. "She can see us." The lights came back on. I was alone. But the cell phones were gone. All of them, like they'd never been there at all. Only the paper remained. I ran. I made it to the parking lot. My car was where I'd left it. But as I fumbled for my keys, I saw him, Dr. Morrison, standing by the emergency entrance, just standing there. Dr. Morrison, I ran toward him. Oh, thank God, where is everyone? What happened? He turned to look at me. Slow, too slow, like his neck was on a rusty hinge, his eyes. Have you ever seen eyes that weren't quite right? Like someone had scooped out everything that made a person and left just the shell. Sarah, his voice was flat, emotionless. You shouldn't be here. Where is everyone? Where did they go? He tilted his head, that same too slow movement. They're still here. They've always been here. We've always been here. I don't understand. 11:32. He said it like it explained everything. Every October 23rd, 11:32, the veil gets thin, and some of us slip through. Slip through to where? He smiled. It was the worst thing I'd ever seen, because it wasn't a smile. It was just his mouth making the shape of one. To the other side of here, the place that's always been, under, between, where the walls are soft and the rules are... He paused. Different. My watch beeped. 3 a.m. 33 minutes, he said. You should run now. I backed away. What happens at 3:33? We come back. All of us. But Sarah... That horrible smile widened. We bring something with us. Something that's been waiting. Something that's been so very hungry. I ran to my car, slammed the door, started the engine. In my rearview mirror, I could see him still standing there. But now there were others. Dozens of them, all standing perfectly still, all watching me leave. I drove. Fast, reckless. At 3:32 I was miles away. But I pulled over, had to, because I needed to see, needed to know. At exactly 3:33 a.m. my phone rang. Unknown number, I answered, breathing. Slow, steady. Then Janet's voice. But not Janet, not really. Sarah? We're back. Everything's back to normal. You should come back. We need you here. We all need you here. I hung up, turned off my phone, drove home. The next morning, the news reported a gas leak at St. Mary's. Said the midnight shift had been evacuated. Said everyone was fine. Showed interviews with nurses I knew, doctors I'd worked with for years, all saying the same thing. Gas leak, evacuation, everything's fine. But their eyes... I never went back. Moved out of state 2 days later, changed my number. Tried to forget. But every October 23rd at 11:31 p.m., my new phone rings. Unknown number. I don't answer. But the voicemail is always the same. 47 voices, all speaking in unison. We're still here, Sarah. We'll always be here, and one day, you'll slip through too. If you're still listening, if you made it this far, check your clock. What time is it? Is it close to 11:32? Or maybe it's closer to 3:33? Either way, if your phone rings tonight, if the number is unknown, don't answer. Whatever you do, don't answer. And if you work the midnight shift, if you work at a hospital, and you notice the time is 11:31 on October 23rd, run. Just run. But here's the thing that keeps me awake at night, the thing that makes me check my locks twice, 3 times, before bed. St. Mary's wasn't special, it was just first. Since that night, I've been keeping track, searching news stories, hospital evacuations, unexplained staff absences, gas leak cover stories. It's spreading, city by city, hospital by hospital. So let me ask you one more time. What time is it where you are? And more importantly, where do you work? Sweet dreams. Leave a comment below if you've ever experienced something unexplainable during a night shift. And subscribe. Because this isn't the only story I have to tell, and trust me, the others, they're worse. Much, much worse. The clock on my nightstand reads 2:17 a.m. as I record this. I haven't slept properly in months. Not since that night, and definitely not since I learned the truth about what really happened. The truth they don't want you to know. See, I left out some details in what I just told you. Had to, because if I'd told you everything right away, you wouldn't have believed me. But now that you've heard the basics, now I can tell you what really happened in those missing minutes. What I saw in the security footage that Janet didn't mention, what I found in the basement of St. Mary's, and why I know, with absolute certainty, that it's going to happen again. 3 weeks after that night, I got a package. No return address. Inside was a USB drive and a note. Same shaky handwriting from the OR. You deserve to know, floor 3, supply closet, behind the oxygen tanks, 11:28 to 11:34. I shouldn't have looked, should have thrown it away, moved on with my life. But you know how it is, when something gets under your skin, when you need answers more than you need sleep. The video file was labeled SCH102323B3SC, Security Camera Hospital, October 23rd, Basement 3, Supply Closet. My hands shook as I clicked play. 11:28 p.m. The supply closet, normal. Shelves of medical supplies. Oxygen tanks lined against the back wall, nothing special, nothing... Wait. Behind the oxygen tanks, movement, the shadow first. Spreading across the wall like spilled ink, then the wall itself started to ripple. Like water. Like something was pushing through from the other side. 11:29 p.m. The first hand emerged, pale, too long, too many joints. It pressed against our side of the wall, fingers spreading, searching. Then another hand, and another. And another. 11:30 p.m. They started pulling people through. I saw Rebecca first. She was checking inventory, clipboard in hand. The hands grabbed her ankles. She didn't scream, couldn't scream. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. They pulled her backward through the wall that had become liquid. Hungry liquid. 11:31 p.m. More hands. Dozens, hundreds, reaching through walls, floors, ceilings, everywhere at once. I watched Dr. Morrison get pulled through the floor of the OR, watched the entire ICU nursing staff get dragged through the walls, watched 47 people disappear in less than 60 seconds. 11:32 p.m. Empty, every hall, every room, except there was something else in the footage. In the spaces where people had been, shadows that moved wrong, shapes that didn't match anything casting them, and in the supply closet, where that wall had been liquid, words burned into the concrete, still glowing. Every 27 years, payment due, 47 souls, contract fulfilled. 11:33 p.m. The walls returned to normal. The shadows faded, everything looked exactly as it should, except for those words, still burning, still there. 11:34 p.m. The footage ended. I threw up. Then I started researching. St. Mary's Memorial Hospital, built in 1915. But here's what the official history doesn't tell you. It was built on the site of the old Riverside Sanitarium, the one that burned down in 1888. The night shift that night? 47 people, all lost in the fire. Only it wasn't a fire. I found the newspaper clippings, buried in the historical archives. October 23, 1888. Mysterious disappearance at Riverside Sanitarium. 47 staff members vanished, no bodies found, no explanation. The fire was a cover story. 1915. St. Mary's opens. October 23, 1942. 27 years later. Another incident. 47 midnight shift workers. Another cover story. Carbon monoxide leak, 1916. 27 years later. 47 people. Equipment malfunction, 1917. 27 years later. 47 people. Chemical spill, 1918. 27 years later. You see the pattern. Every 27 years, same date, same time, same number of people. And always, always the midnight shift. But why? What's so special about 47? About 27 years, about 11:32 p.m.? I kept digging, found an old journal in an estate sale. Belonged to a nurse who worked at Riverside in the 1880s. Margaret O'Brien. Her final entry was October 22nd, 1888, the night before the disappearance. Dr. Blackwood continues his experiments in the basement. Says he's found a way to breach the veil. Says there are things on the other side, hungry things. Things that will trade knowledge for payment. I fear what he plans to do. I fear what price he's willing to pay. The others don't believe me. But I've seen the symbols he's drawn. I've heard the whispers in the walls. Tomorrow is the alignment. Tomorrow, he says, everything changes. Dr. Elias Blackwood. I found his medical license, his property records, his death certificate. Except, he didn't die in the 1888 fire. He died in 1923, 35 years later, at the age of 128. Impossible? Yeah, that's what I thought too, until I found his other papers. The ones his estate donated to the University of Iowa. The ones they keep in the restricted collection. The ones that describe exactly what he did that night in 1888. Getting access to those papers took some doing. Fake credentials, bribes, lies. But I needed to know, needed to understand. Dr. Blackwood was obsessed with extending human life, not just by years, by centuries. He'd studied everything: medicine, chemistry, physics, and when science failed him, he turned to other things, older things. His journal talks about the spaces between, places where our reality touches others, where the rules are different, where things that shouldn't exist do. He spent years learning how to find these spaces, how to open them, how to negotiate with what lived there. On October 23, 1888, at 11:32 p.m., during what he called the thinning, he made contact, made a deal. 47 souls for knowledge, 47 lives for the secret of extended life. But here's the thing about deals with things that live between spaces. They're recurring, like a subscription service from hell. Every 27 years, payment comes due. 47 souls. Taken at the exact moment of the original breach. 11:32 p.m. But the people taken, they don't die. Not exactly. They become something else. Part of the payment system. Collectors for the next cycle. That's what Dr. Morrison meant. They don't leave. They just slip into the spaces between. And when they come back, they're not themselves anymore. They're employees of something else. Something that feeds on the fear, the confusion, the slow realization that reality isn't what we thought it was. You want proof? Fine, here's proof. Remember, I said other hospitals lost their midnight shifts that night. That was true, but what I didn't tell you was that it was exactly 47 people, total, across all the hospitals. 16 from St. Mary's, 12 from Mercy General, 9 from Lutheran, 10 from University Medical, 47. Exactly. To the person. And here's something else. Those people who came back, the ones who gave the gas leak interviews, I tracked them down, watched them, followed them. They don't eat, never seen one take a single bite of food. They don't sleep, their lights are on all night, every night, and they don't age. I have photos, Rebecca from 3 months ago, Rebecca from last week, exactly the same. Not a new wrinkle, not a gray hair, nothing. But the worst part, the absolute worst part, they're recruiting. I've seen them at nursing schools, medical colleges, talking to students about opportunities at St. Mary's, about the excellent benefits of working the midnight shift, about how rewarding it can be. They're preparing, building a roster, because in 2050, 27 years from now, they'll need another 47. But I escaped, right? I got away. That's what I thought too, until last week, until I realized the truth. Remember that shoe I found in the stairwell? Rebecca's shoe? I kept it. Don't know why. Souvenir, maybe? Proof that it really happened? Last week I was cleaning out my closet. Found the shoe in a box. But there was something inside it. Something that wasn't there before. A note, my handwriting. But I never wrote it. Sarah, when you read this, you'll finally understand. You didn't escape. Nobody escapes. You were allowed to leave. To spread the story. To plant the seeds of fear. To prepare the next harvest. Check your employment records. Check carefully. Love yourself. P.S. See you in 2050. I checked. My employment records at St. Mary's show I never left. Show I'm still working. Midnight shift, every night. Perfect attendance. I called HR. They confirmed. Said I was just there last night. Said I'm scheduled again tonight. Said I'm one of their best employees. But I haven't been back. Haven't stepped foot in Iowa since that night. Have I, or have I? The truth is, I don't sleep anymore, can't sleep. Because every time I close my eyes, I'm there. In the hospital, working, charting, medicating, and in those dreams that aren't dreams, I see myself in the mirrors. But my eyes are wrong. Empty, like Dr. Morrison's. And sometimes I wake up with my scrubs on. Sometimes I wake up with hospital badges I don't remember getting. From hospitals I've never been to. In states I've never visited. Sometimes I wake up and my phone shows calls I don't remember making. To numbers that belong to nursing schools, medical colleges, recruiting. Here's what I think happened. What really happened. I didn't escape that night. Nobody escapes. I was taken at 11:32 just like the others, pulled through the walls, processed, changed. A part of me, the real me, got stuck, split between here and there, between what I was and what I've become. During the day, I'm Sarah, the one recording this, the one warning you, the one who thinks she got away, but at night, when the veil is thin, I'm one of them. Working, recruiting, preparing for 2050, and the worst part, the absolute worst part, I can feel it getting stronger, the other me. Every day, a little more, every night, a little longer. Soon, there won't be any difference between day Sarah and night Sarah. Soon, there will only be them, us. So why am I telling you this? Why share this story? Because maybe, just maybe, if enough people know something can change. Maybe if enough people refuse to work midnight shifts. Maybe if enough people stay away from hospitals on October 23rd. Maybe if enough people understand what's really happening. Or maybe that's just what they want me to think. Maybe this is all part of the plan. Maybe every person who hears this story becomes marked, counted, part of the next harvest. Maybe by listening to this you've already been selected. Check your phone, right now. Check your recent calls. Any unknown numbers? Any calls you don't remember getting? Any voicemails that are just breathing? Check your dreams tonight. Are you somewhere you shouldn't be? Doing something you don't remember choosing to do? Are your eyes still your own when you look in the mirror? The number 47 isn't random. It's specific, calculated. The exact number needed to maintain the barrier, to keep the things on the other side from pushing through completely. We're not sacrifices. We're guards. Unwilling guards. Eternal guards. And every 27 years the guard changes. But here's a secret. Something I found in Dr. Blackwood's final notes. Something that might matter. The contract can be broken, but only by someone who exists in both places. Someone split between here and there. Someone like me. The next alignment is October 23rd, 2050. But there's another date, a special one. October 23rd, 2025. The halfway point. The moment when the veil is thinnest. When someone who exists in both places might what? The pages were torn, destroyed. But I think I know. I think that's why I'm still partially here, why I wasn't fully taken. I'm supposed to do something. On October 23rd, 2025. Something important. Something that could end this. or make it so much worse. So now you know everything, the truth, the whole truth. The question is, what are you going to do with it? Will you share this story, spread the warning, try to save the 47 people who will be taken in 2050? Or will you do the smart thing, the safe thing? Forget you ever heard this. Delete this video from your history. Pretend that the world is normal and safe and that people don't disappear into walls. But before you decide, one more thing, something I noticed while researching. Something that made my blood run cold. The disappearances aren't limited to the United States anymore. That night, in 2023, hospitals in Canada lost staff. Mexico, the UK, Germany, Japan, Australia. Exactly 11:32 p.m. local time. Different time zones. Same moment. 47 people per country. It's spreading. The contract is expanding. And the next time? 2050? How many countries will it be? How many 47s? How many souls to feed whatever waits on the other side? But hey, that's 26 years away. Plenty of time to forget. Plenty of time to convince yourself this was just a story, just entertainment. Just a creepy tale to help you fall asleep. Sweet dreams. Oh, and one more thing. That coffee maker I mentioned, the one that was still brewing when I arrived? I took a sample, had it analyzed. You know what was in it? Besides coffee? Blood. Type O negative. The universal donor, Rebecca's blood type. Still want that coffee before your shift tomorrow? Still feeling safe in your hospital? Still think the midnight shift is just another shift? Check the time. What time is it now? How close is it to 11:32? Or 3:33? Or any of the other times when the veil gets thin? And ask yourself, honestly, when was the last time you actually remember falling asleep? Or waking up? When was the last time you were absolutely certain where you were? Who you were? When was the last time you were sure you weren't already one of them? Leave a comment if you've noticed anything strange during night shifts. Subscribe if you want to hear what happened to the other nurses who tried to investigate. Because Rebecca, she left notes too, hidden in places only a nurse would look. And what she discovered about the basement, about what's really under St. Mary's, about what Dr. Blackwood built down there, that's a whole other story. One that explains why the number is always 47, why it's always hospitals, and why October 23rd isn't the only date we should fear. But that story, that'll have to wait, because it's getting late, and I have to go to work soon. Or do I? I honestly can't remember anymore. Can you? Story number 2. You wouldn't believe me if I told you what I heard last night. Actually, scratch that. You might, because once I tell you this story, you'll start hearing them too. The voices. The ones that shouldn't exist anymore. My name is Sarah Chen, and 3 weeks ago I moved into the Grandview Apartments in downtown Seattle. Built in 1951, renovated never. The rent was suspiciously cheap, $800 for one bedroom when everything else in the area was going for twice that. The landlord, Mr. Kowalski, just shrugged when I asked why. Old building, he said. The heating's a bit noisy. Noisy. Right. Look, before you click away thinking this is just another ghost story, it's not. At least, not in the way you think. The voices I hear, they're real. They were real. And if you live in an old building with those big metal ventilation shafts, the kind they don't make anymore, you might want to pay attention. Because what I discovered isn't just happening in my building. The story begins now. The first night was fine. Unpacking boxes, eating takeout from the Thai place downstairs, falling asleep to the hum of Seattle traffic. Normal stuff. The apartment smelled like old wood and that specific scent that old buildings have, you know the one. Like decades of different lives all layered on top of each other. The ventilation grate was in my bedroom right above the dresser. One of those ornate metal ones with the Art Deco pattern. Beautiful, actually. I remember thinking it was charming. Vintage, Instagram-worthy. God, I was an idiot, but before I get to what happened, let me tell you about the building itself. because understanding the Grandview means understanding why what happened to me was inevitable. The Grandview apartments were built during the post-war boom, when Seattle was transforming from a sleepy port town into a major city. The architect, some guy named Edmund Reeves, had this vision of creating homes that would nurture the American dream. He designed the ventilation system himself, using a technique he'd learned from his mentor who'd worked on the great Art Deco buildings in New York. The vents weren't just functional. They were artistic. Hand-forged metal ducts that curved and twisted through the building like a circulatory system. Reeves believed that airflow should be as beautiful as it was practical. He installed speaking tubes between apartments, thinking it would build community. He created acoustic chambers that amplified sound in unexpected ways. What he didn't realize was that he was building the world's most sophisticated recording device. I learned all this from the building's original blueprints, which I found in the Seattle Public Library's archives after everything started. The vent system was designed to carry air, but Reeves had inadvertently created something that could carry much more. Sound waves, with their complex frequencies, could bounce through those metal chambers for decades, creating what acoustics experts call resonance memory. Think of it like this. You know how you can hear the ocean in a seashell? That's because the shell's shape captures and amplifies ambient sound waves. Now, imagine a seashell the size of an entire building, one that's been collecting conversations for 70 years. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It started on the second night. I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone when I heard it. Faint. So faint, I thought it was coming from the apartment next door. A woman's voice, singing, in the sweet by and by. Old-fashioned. Like something from my grandmother's era. I muted my phone, listened harder. The voice was definitely coming from the vent. Okay, I thought. Someone upstairs likes oldies. No big deal. People sing in their apartments all the time. I've done it. You've probably done it. But then, Harold, dinner's ready. Clear as day, like someone was standing in my room. I actually sat up and looked around, heart hammering. Nothing. Just me and my half-unpacked boxes. The voice came again, fainter this time. Harold, don't let it get cold now. I grabbed my phone, checked the time. 11:47 p.m. Who the hell was cooking dinner at midnight? I texted my friend Maya. Hey, do voices carry weird in old buildings? My upstairs neighbor is loud. She responded with a laughing emoji. Welcome to apartment living, princess. Get some earplugs. Right. Earplugs. That would solve everything. The next morning, I ran into Mrs. Liu in the hallway. She'd lived in 3B for 40 years, knew everyone and everything about the building. Mrs. Liu was one of those people who seemed to exist outside of time. Ageless, wise, with eyes that had seen everything. She was also, I would later learn, the unofficial keeper of the building's secrets. "How are you settling in, dear?" she asked, balancing her grocery bags with the ease of someone who'd made this same trip thousands of times. "Good. Though, quick question, who lives above me? In 4A? Her face did this thing. This quick flicker of something. Fear? Sadness? It was gone so fast I almost missed it. 4A? Oh, that's been empty for years. Mr. Kowalski uses it for storage." My stomach dropped a little. "Are you sure? I heard someone up there last night, cooking, singing." She shifted her bags, not quite meeting my eyes. "These old buildings. Sound travel's funny. Could be from anywhere. The vents, you know. They connect all the units." Then she hurried off before I could ask anything else. But as she walked away, I heard her mutter something under her breath in what sounded like Mandarin. Years later, I would ask her what she'd said. The translation was, "The building is waking up." That night, I was ready. Phone on silent, notepad beside me, every sense on high alert. I even put a glass of water on my nightstand. You know how they say ghosts make things cold? I wanted to see if the temperature changed. I also did something else. I downloaded a sound analysis app. If I was going to hear voices, I wanted to understand what I was actually hearing. Was it just the building settling, pipes expanding, some kind of audio pareidolia where my brain was creating patterns that weren't really there? 10 p.m. Nothing. 11 p.m. Still nothing. 11:43 p.m. Harold, have you seen my pearl necklace? I shot up in bed. The same woman's voice, but clearer now, younger sounding. There was a quality to it, like an old recording, like when you listen to those vintage radio shows on YouTube. But here's the thing that still gives me chills. The sound analysis app was going crazy. It was picking up frequencies that shouldn't exist. Subsonic vibrations, harmonic overtones that suggested the sound was coming from inside the walls themselves. The one your mother gave me, I can't find it anywhere. I grabbed my phone, hit record. Whatever this was, I wanted proof. A man's voice answered. Deep, gravelly, with the kind of accent that suggested he'd grown up somewhere else before coming to Seattle. Did you check the jewelry box? Of course I checked the jewelry box. I'm not simple, Harold. There was warmth in her voice, teasing, the kind of comfortable banter that comes from years of marriage. But underneath it, I could hear something else. Worry. The kind of deep, gnawing concern that suggested this wasn't just about a lost necklace. Well, where did you wear it last? Harold asked, and I could hear the smile in his voice. This was clearly a familiar dance between them. To the Johnsons' dinner party, last Tuesday, remember? You said I looked like $1 million. You always look like $1 million, doll. She laughed. It was such a real human sound that I found myself smiling despite the absolute insanity of the situation. This wasn't some horror movie ghost. This was a couple, deeply in love, having a conversation about everyday life. Then, silence. I held my breath, phone still recording. The temperature hadn't changed. No cold spots, no flickering lights. Just voices from an empty apartment, having a conversation about lost jewelry. But when I played back the recording, something impossible happened. The first few seconds were clear. You could hear my breathing, the hum of the building's electrical system, even the distant sound of traffic. But then, static. Just static. Like something was actively scrubbing the voices from the recording. I tried again the next night. Same result. The app would detect the anomalous frequencies in real time, but the moment I tried to save or share the recording, it would degrade into white noise. It was like the building was protecting its secrets. The next day, I did what any reasonable millennial would do. I Googled the hell out of my building. Grandview Apartments. Seattle history, Grandview Apartments haunted. Seattle apartment building, 1,951 inches, nothing useful. Just old real estate listings and a few Yelp reviews complaining about the radiators. But then I tried something different. Seattle ventilation systems 1950s, and there it was. A Reddit thread from 3 years ago. Subject: does anyone else hear old conversations through their vents? My hands shook as I scrolled through the comments. I'm in a 1953 building in Capitol Hill. Every night around 11:30, I hear a man talking about baseball scores. Like old baseball, teams that don't exist anymore. Dude, yes. I'm in Ballard, old building from 1949. I hear kids playing, but like old-timey games, jacks and marbles and stuff. This is going to sound crazy, but I recorded mine. Took it to my physics professor. He said something about sound waves getting trapped in metal, like how they can retrieve sound from old pottery. That last comment had a reply. Post the recording. I tried. It's just static when I play it back, but I know what I heard. My heart was racing. I wasn't crazy. Other people were experiencing this. Whatever this was. I kept scrolling until I found a comment that made my blood run cold. I researched my building. Apartment 6B. Found out a woman named Dorothy lived there in 1952. I hear her every night talking to her husband about their son in Korea. Looked her up, their son died in the war. December 1952. The conversations I'm hearing, they're from before they knew. I closed my laptop, stared at the vent above my dresser. What was I listening to? And more importantly, why was I hearing it now? The answer came from an unexpected source, Dr. Elena Vasquez, a professor of acoustics at the University of Washington. I'd found her through the Reddit thread. She was the physics professor who'd analyzed one of the recordings. I called her office, expecting to be dismissed as another crazy person. Instead, she invited me to her lab. "You're the fourth person to contact me about this phenomenon in the past 2 years," she said, gesturing to a wall covered in acoustic analysis charts. All from buildings constructed between 1949 and 1955. All experiencing the same thing. She showed me waveform analyses that looked like abstract art. These frequencies shouldn't exist in a normal acoustic environment. But if you look at the construction techniques used in post-war buildings, the specific gauge of metal used in the ventilation systems, the way the ducts were shaped and connected. She pulled up a 3D model on her computer. These buildings were inadvertently designed to capture and preserve sound waves in ways we're only beginning to understand. The metal acts like a recording medium. The acoustic properties of the ductwork create resonance chambers that can store audio information for decades. But why are people hearing them now? Why not before? Dr. Vasquez smiled grimly. Because the buildings are dying. The metal is deteriorating. The acoustic properties are changing. As the structures weaken, the stored sound waves are being released. She showed me a map of Seattle with red dots marking buildings experiencing the phenomenon. Notice anything? I did. Every single dot was on a building scheduled for demolition or major renovation. The buildings are singing their swan songs, she said, releasing their memories before they disappear forever. That evening, I knocked on Mrs. Liu's door. She answered in a housecoat, looking tired but not surprised to see me. "I'm sorry to bother you," I said, "but I need to know about the people who lived in 4A in the 1950s. She sighed, like she'd been expecting this. "Come in, dear, I'll make tea." Her apartment was exactly what you'd expect. Doilies, family photos, the smell of jasmine. But what struck me was how many photos there were. Not just of her family, but of the building. Decades of Christmas parties, birthday celebrations, impromptu gatherings in the lobby. The Grandview hadn't just been a place to live, it had been a community. She handed me a delicate cup and sat across from me. "You're hearing them, aren't you, Harold and Margaret?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. They were a lovely couple, moved in right when the building opened, 1951. Harold worked at Boeing, engineer. Margaret was a housewife. They had 2 children. She sipped her tea. They were so happy. What happened to them? Mrs. Liu was quiet for a long moment. "Nothing dramatic, if that's what you're thinking. They lived here for 40 years, raised their children, grew old. Harold died in 1991. Heart attack. Margaret followed 2 years later. So why am I hearing them from 1952? She set down her cup carefully. My grandmother used to say that buildings have memories, that strong emotions, repeated daily routines. They leave impressions, like grooves in a record. But why now? Why am I hearing them now? When did you start hearing them, the exact date? I thought back. October 15th, my second night here. She smiled sadly. October 15th, 1952, was when Margaret lost her pearl necklace. I know because she told me the story years later. It was her most treasured possession, a wedding gift from Harold's mother. She was devastated. Did she ever find it? 3 days later, it had fallen behind the radiator. Mrs. Liu stood, walked to her window. She said those 3 days were awful. She was convinced it was a bad omen. Her brother was in Korea, you see. She thought losing the necklace meant... She didn't finish, but she didn't need to. Every year, around this time, the building remembers. The vents carry their voices, their worry, their love. She turned back to me. You're not the first tenant to hear them. You won't be the last. Why didn't anyone tell me? Would you have believed it? Would you have moved in? She had a point. What do I do? How do I make it stop? Why would you want to? She seemed genuinely puzzled. They're harmless. Just echoes of a life well lived. In a few days it will fade. Until next October. I left her apartment more unsettled than before. Echoes? Memories? It sounded insane, but then again, so did voices from 1952. That night, I lay in bed, waiting. I decided to embrace it. If I was going to hear ghosts, or echoes, or whatever, I might as well listen. 11:43 p.m., right on schedule. Harold, I've looked everywhere, the dresser, the bathroom, under the bed. Calm down, Maggie, it'll turn up. But what if it doesn't? What if it's gone forever? Your mother will never forgive me. Hey now. His voice got softer. Mother gave you that necklace because she loves you, because I love you. A necklace is just a thing. What matters is what it represents. I know, but nothing. Come here. There was a long pause. I could almost see them. Her crying, him holding her. A couple in their little apartment, dealing with a small crisis that felt enormous in the moment. I'm being silly, Margaret finally said. You're being human, Harold replied. Now, let's think. Where haven't we looked? I don't know, maybe behind the radiator, but I can't move that heavy thing. I can. First thing tomorrow, I'll pull it out. Bet you anything it's there. You think so? I know so. Things don't just disappear, Maggie. They're always somewhere. Their voices faded, leaving me alone in the dark. I realized I was crying. Not from fear, but from, I don't know, the sweetness of it, the ordinary beauty of a husband comforting his wife. I thought about all the conversations that must have happened in this room, all the whispered secrets, the arguments, the laughter, the tears. Were they all still here somehow, trapped in the metal veins of the building? The next morning, I woke up with a crazy idea. I grabbed my toolkit. Okay, it was just a hammer and a screwdriver, but whatever, and started working on the ventilation grate. It took an hour of wrestling with 70-year-old screws, but finally, the grate came loose. I shined my phone's flashlight into the duct. It was exactly what you'd expect. Dusty metal stretching into darkness. But there, caught on a seam about a foot in, something glinted. I reached in, grimacing at the dust and probable spiders, and pulled out a pearl necklace. My heart stopped. It couldn't be. It was impossible. But there it was, a single strand of pearls, the clasp tarnished with age. Real pearls, from the look of them, the kind they don't make anymore. I sat on my bedroom floor, staring at the necklace. How was this possible? Mrs. Liu said Margaret found it behind the radiator. In 1952. How could it be in my vent in 2024? Unless... I grabbed my phone, called Mrs. Liu. She answered on the second ring. You found it, didn't you? She didn't sound surprised. How is this possible? Come downstairs, bring the necklace. 5 minutes later, I was back in her apartment. She took the necklace gently, running her fingers over the pearls. I need to tell you something, she said, about Margaret and Harold. Okay. They didn't die in the 90s. They're still alive. The room tilted. What? They're in a nursing home in Bellevue, both in their 90s now. I visit them sometimes. She handed the necklace back to me. This isn't the same necklace from 1952. It's one Margaret lost last year, when they were still living in 4A. But you said 4A has been empty for years. I said Mr. Kowalski uses it for storage. I didn't say for how long. She smiled sadly. Harold and Margaret only moved out 13 months ago, when the stairs became too much. My brain was spinning. So, the voices are echoes, but not from 1952, from last year. The building doesn't just remember the distant past, Sarah. It remembers everything, all the conversations, all the emotions, all the lost things. But why am I hearing conversations from 1952? Are you sure they're from 1952? Or are they just conversations about 1952? Harold and Margaret, they like to reminisce, especially after Harold's memory started to go. She would help him remember their early days. October 15th, 1952. October 15th, 2023. To the building, it's all the same. I stared at the necklace in my hands. I should return this to them. Yes, Mrs. Liu agreed. You should. The next day, I drove to the Sunshine Senior Living Center in Bellevue. It was one of those nice places that tried very hard not to look like what it was. I found them in the garden, 2 small figures on a bench holding hands. Margaret's hair was white as snow, Harold's mostly gone. But when they looked at each other, you could still see the young couple from 1952. "Excuse me," I said. "Are you Margaret and Harold from the Grandview Apartments?" Margaret's eyes lit up. "Oh, yes, dear. Do we know you?" "I live in your old apartment, 3A. I found something of yours." I pulled out the necklace. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. "My pearls. Oh, Harold, look, my pearls." Harold squinted at the necklace, then at his wife. "The ones from Mother?" "Yes." She was crying now, happy tears. "I thought they were gone forever. Where did you find them?" "In the ventilation system," I said. "They must have fallen." "Oh, I'm always dropping things in there." Margaret laughed through her tears. "Harold used to joke that the vents were eating my jewelry." I helped her put the necklace on. She touched it gently, then looked at me with eyes that were suddenly very sharp. "You hear us, don't you, in the apartment?" I nodded, not sure what to say. "I'm glad," she said simply. "I'm glad someone remembers our happy times there. We were so happy." "We still are," Harold added, patting her hand. "Yes," she agreed, "we still are." I stayed for another hour, listening to their stories. About the building, about their lives, about all the things they'd lost and found over the years. When I left, Margaret hugged me. "Take care of our home," she whispered. "And don't be afraid of the voices. They're just memories, finding their way back." That night, I lay in bed, waiting. The necklace was back with its owner, but somehow I knew the voices would still come. The building would still remember. 11:43 p.m. "Harold, have you seen my pearl necklace?" But this time I understood. It wasn't a ghost story. It wasn't a haunting. It was just love echoing through time. A building holding on to the happiness that had filled its walls. "Did you check the jewelry box?" Harold's voice, patient and kind. "Of course, I checked the jewelry box. I'm not simple, Harold." I smiled in the darkness. Tomorrow, I'd install some padding around the vent. Not to block the voices, but to make sure nothing else fell in. Because Margaret was right. Things don't disappear. They're always somewhere waiting to be found. But as I drifted off to sleep, one thought kept nagging at me. Mrs. Liu had said the building remembers everything. All the conversations, all the emotions. If that was true, what else was I going to hear? What other memories were trapped in those metal veins, waiting for the right moment to escape? And more importantly, what had made them start escaping now? I got my answer 3 nights later, but by then it was too late to move out. And that's when I learned the real reason the rent was so cheap. It started with a different voice. Male, younger than Harold, angry. "You can't do this. This is our home." Another man, cold and businesslike. "I'm sorry, Mr. Peterson, but the decision has been made. The building will be demolished in 6 months." My blood ran cold. Demolished? Where are we supposed to go? Do you have any idea how many families live here? "There are resources available." "Resources? We don't need resources, we need our homes." The voices faded, but I was already grabbing my phone. A quick search confirmed my worst fear. The Grandview apartments were scheduled for demolition. The new owner wanted to put up luxury condos. 6 months. We all had 6 months. And suddenly, I understood why I was hearing the voices. Why now? Why me? Why all of us in our old buildings were experiencing the same thing. The buildings knew. Somehow, they knew their time was ending. And they were trying to tell us their stories. All their stories. Before it was too late. I thought about Harold and Margaret, safe in their nursing home, not knowing their first home together was going to be destroyed. I thought about Mrs. Liu, who'd lived here for 40 years. I thought about all the voices trapped in the vents, all the memories that would be lost forever when the wrecking ball came. And I made a decision. If the building wanted to tell its stories, I was going to listen. All of them, every voice, every memory, every lost thing waiting to be found. I had 6 months to save 70 years of history. The next night, I was ready with a better recorder. One designed for picking up EVP, electronic voice phenomena. If I couldn't capture the voices normally, maybe this would work. 11:43 p.m. came and went. No Harold, no Margaret. Instead, "Mommy, can I have another story?" A child's voice, sweet, sleepy. "One more, baby, then bedtime." The one about the princess. Again, okay, once upon a time. I let the recorder run, tears streaming down my face. Somewhere in time, a mother was tucking her child into bed in this very room. And the building remembered. Over the next weeks, I heard them all. The young couple arguing about money. The old man practicing his saxophone. The teenager talking to her best friend about her first kiss. The family celebrating Christmas. The woman crying after a breakup. Life in all its messy, beautiful complexity. And I recorded everything, not with normal equipment. That never worked, but with the EVP recorder, I caught whispers. Fragments. Enough to prove I wasn't crazy. I started a blog, the Grandview Memories Project. I interviewed current and former tenants. I collected photos, stories, anything I could find. Mrs. Liu helped, introducing me to people who'd moved out years ago but still remembered. The blog went viral. Turns out, people all over the country were experiencing the same thing in buildings slated for demolition. Had vanishing voices started trending. News crews showed up. But the best part? 3 weeks ago, I got an email. The demolition had been postponed pending a historical review. The city was considering landmark status for the Grandview and other vintage buildings. We might have done it, we might have saved them. Last night, I heard Harold and Margaret again. But this time, it was different. "Did you hear, Maggie? They might save the old place." Oh, Harold, wouldn't that be wonderful? All those memories, all those lives, they matter, don't they? Even the small ones. Maybe especially the small ones. Every single one, doll. Every single one. Their voices faded, and I swear I felt the building itself sigh with relief. I still live in 3A. The rent's still cheap, and yes, I still hear voices, but now I know what they are. Not ghosts, not hauntings, just memories, desperate to be remembered, stories that refuse to be forgotten. And I'll keep listening. As long as the building stands, I'll keep listening, because Harold was right. Things don't just disappear. They're always somewhere, waiting to be found. So I have to ask, what do you hear in your vents? What memories is your building trying to save? Because if you're in an old building, especially one that might be torn down, you might want to start listening. The voices are there. They've always been there. And they have so much to tell you before it's too late. Story number 3. Listen closely, because what I'm about to tell you happened just 3 weeks ago, and I need someone, anyone, to believe me before it happens again. You know that feeling when you're standing on a train platform at 2:47 a.m. and you realize you're the only living soul for miles? That crushing silence that makes your own heartbeat sound like thunder. Yeah, that's where this all started. But here's the thing that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. I wasn't supposed to be there. Nobody was. The Millbrook station had been closed for renovation since October. Yet, there I stood, watching an unmarked train pull in with every car completely, utterly empty. And I got on. God help me, I got on. If you're listening to this late at night, maybe turn on another light. Because what happened on that train, what I saw, it's still out there, and it's looking for more passengers. The story begins now. My name is David Chen, and I've been a freight coordinator for Norfolk Southern Railways for 11 years. I know trains, I know schedules. I know which tracks are active and which have been decommissioned since the 60s. That's why nothing about that night made sense. I'd been driving back from a logistics conference in Pittsburgh, running on 3 hours of sleep and enough coffee to kill a horse. My GPS had been acting up all day, rerouting me through back roads I'd never seen before. Around 2:30 a.m., it just died. Complete blackout. That's when I saw the lights. Not street lights. We don't have those on rural Route 49. These were platform lights. Old ones. The kind with the yellow sodium glow that makes everything look sick. They illuminated a train station that absolutely, positively, should not have been there. The Millbrook station. Now, I need you to understand something. I'd personally overseen the closure documents for Millbrook, signed off on the construction barriers myself. The tracks were supposed to be torn up for scrap, but there it stood, looking exactly like it did in the old photographs from 1952. Fresh paint, gleaming windows. Even had those vintage wooden benches that were destroyed in a fire back in '87. I pulled over, partly from shock, mostly from that inexplicable pull you feel when reality stops making sense. You know that sensation when you're dreaming and you can't quite wake up? When everything feels both real and impossible at the same time? That's what walking onto that platform felt like. The air tasted wrong. Not bad, just old, like breathing in memories. And cold, but not winter cold. This was the kind of cold that comes from absence, from emptiness, from spaces that shouldn't exist. Then I heard it. The horn. Not the modern air horns we use now, but that deep, mournful steam whistle that hadn't echoed through these hills since my grandfather's time. It rolled across the darkness like fog, and I swear I felt it in my chest more than heard it with my ears. The ground began to vibrate, just slightly at first, then building to that rhythmic thunder every rail worker knows by heart. A train was coming, but from which direction? The tracks ran east-west, but the sound came from everywhere. Like the night itself was bringing it forth. I should have run. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to get back in my car and drive until I hit a town with lights and people and things that made sense. But I didn't, because somewhere deeper than logic, older than reason, I knew I was meant to be there. The headlamp pierced the darkness first. A single yellow eye that seemed to look right through me. Then came the engine, and this is where things get truly strange. It wasn't any model I recognized. Not from Norfolk Southern. Not from CSX. Not from any line that's operated in North America in the last century. It was beautiful, though. Black as midnight with gold trim that caught the platform lights like fire. Steam billowed from places steam shouldn't billow, creating patterns in the air that hurt to look at directly. And the cars, 6 passenger cars that looked fresh from the factory. If the factory existed in a time before safety regulations and modern materials. The train slowed, then stopped with a precision that felt deliberate, calculated, like it knew exactly where I was standing. Every door on every car opened simultaneously, and nobody got off. I walked the length of the platform, peering into each car. The interiors were immaculate. Red velvet seats, brass fixtures polished to mirror brightness, gas lamps, actual gas lamps, providing a warm glow that made everything look like a sepia photograph come to life. But empty. Completely, utterly empty. That's when I noticed the smell. Not unpleasant, but distinct. Like old books and funeral flowers and something else. Something sweet that made my mouth water and my stomach turn at the same time. The smart thing would have been to walk away. The safe thing. The sane thing. But standing there on that impossible platform, staring into those empty cars, I realized I'd already crossed some invisible line. The moment I'd stopped my car. Maybe even the moment my GPS had died. I'd entered a story that was already being written. So I stepped aboard. The floor didn't creak under my weight. It should have. Wood that old always creaks. But my footsteps made no sound at all. Like the train was swallowing every noise before it could escape. I chose a seat near the middle of the first car, the velvet surprisingly warm against my palms. That's when the doors closed, all of them in perfect unison, with a sound like a coffin sealing, and the train began to move. No conductor came to check tickets. No announcement crackled over speakers that didn't exist anyway. Just the rhythmic clacking of wheels on tracks that shouldn't have been there, carrying me toward a destination I'd never chosen. I tried to stand, to find the emergency brake, to do something, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. Not paralyzed exactly, more like they'd forgotten they were mine, like my body had become part of the seat, part of the train, part of whatever impossible thing was happening. That's when I noticed I wasn't alone anymore. It started as shadows, little movements in my peripheral vision that vanished when I turned my head. You know how sometimes you're sure someone's behind you, but when you look, there's nothing there? Imagine that feeling multiplied by 100, confined to a moving train car with nowhere to run. Then they began to solidify. The first one appeared 3 rows ahead of me. A woman in a dress that belonged in a museum, 1940s maybe, with those sharp shoulders and that particular shade of navy blue that doesn't exist anymore. She sat perfectly still, facing forward, hands folded in her lap. I could see her in profile, pale skin, dark hair victory rolled like my grandmother used to wear. "Excuse me," my voice came out as a whisper. Had to clear my throat and try again. "Excuse me, miss?" She didn't turn, didn't move, didn't even seem to breathe. But I heard her voice anyway, not with my ears, but somewhere deeper. Somewhere that bypassed sound entirely and spoke directly to whatever part of us knows things we shouldn't know. Not yet. 2 words that made my skin crawl with implications I couldn't grasp. More passengers materialized as the train picked up speed. A man in a zoot suit, a child. No, I won't describe the child. Just know that something was deeply wrong with how still they sat, how empty their presence felt, like looking at photographs that had learned to occupy space. By the time we'd been moving for what felt like 20 minutes, but could have been hours, every seat was occupied except mine. Men, women, all dressed in clothes from different decades, different centuries even. I saw top hats and flapper dresses, military uniforms from wars I couldn't identify. Fashion that seemed to predate photography itself. None of them moved, none of them spoke. but I felt their awareness pressing against me like cold hands. They knew I was there. The wrong passenger. The one who still breathed, still had warmth, still belonged to the world outside the windows. The windows. God, I'd been so focused on the passengers I hadn't looked outside. When I finally did, I wished I hadn't. We weren't traveling through Pennsylvania anymore. We weren't traveling through anywhere that existed on any map I'd ever seen. The landscape outside was, how do I even describe it? Imagine if someone took 1,000 different places and layered them on top of each other like transparent photographs. I saw cities that were both ruins and newly built, forests that were simultaneously lush and barren, skies that held stars and sun and storm all at once, and threading through it all, other tracks, hundreds of them, thousands. A spider web of rails that branched and merged and looped in patterns that made my eyes water. Other trains passed us in the not distance, some modern, some ancient, some that hurt to perceive directly. All of them full of passengers who sat just as still as mine. That's when the woman in the navy dress finally turned to look at me. She had no face, not missing, not blank, just an absence where features should have been. An emptiness that somehow still managed to convey infinite patience, infinite hunger. When she spoke, and she did speak, though she had no mouth, her voice was the sound of 100 people whispering in perfect unison. "You're early." I found my voice, though it came out cracked and strange. "Early for what?" "Your seat." "I don't understand." She tilted her head, that terrible absence where her face should have been somehow managing to express pity. Everyone rides the train eventually. Most wait until their ticket is called. But some hear the whistle before their time. Some see the lights when the station appears. Some step aboard thinking they're just curious. The child, the thing that looked like a child, turned then. Its face was, "No, I can't." Just know that looking at it made me understand why some knowledge comes with madness as its price. But the train never arrives empty, and it never leaves full. There's always room for one more. "I want to get off." The words tumbled out desperate and thin. "This is a mistake. I wasn't supposed to be here. The station was closed. The tracks were torn up. This isn't real." The laughter that filled the car wasn't cruel. It was worse than cruel. It was understanding. The kind of understanding that comes from beings who've watched the same drama play out 1,000,000 times before. Real is such a limited concept. You still think in terms of is and isn't, should and shouldn't. But the train operates on older laws, the kind written before your world decided what was possible. Every passenger turned to look at me then. Dozens of absent faces, dozens of empty spaces where human features should have been, all of them waiting, all of them patient. You can leave, the train hasn't claimed you yet, but you'll need to choose quickly. We're approaching the junction. What junction? What happens at the junction? But they'd already turned away, returned to their still, silent vigil, leaving me alone with the terrible knowledge that something was coming, something that would make leaving impossible. The train began to slow. You know that feeling when you're standing at the edge of a cliff, and some dark part of your mind whispers, "Jump"? Not because you want to, but because the possibility exists and your brain can't stop exploring it? That's what looking out the window at the junction felt like staring into a possibility that should never be acknowledged. The tracks split in ways that defied geometry. Not just left and right, but up and down, forward and backward through time, diverging into dimensions I didn't have names for. Trains waited at every branch, hundreds of them, all identical to ours, all full of passengers who sat in that terrible stillness. And at the center, where all the tracks originated or terminated, stood something that might have been a station, Might have been a temple, might have been a mouth. It was vast in the way that mountains are vast, ancient in the way that darkness is ancient. Built from materials that looked like stone until you noticed they were breathing. Columns that stretched up beyond where the sky should have been. Arches that opened onto vistas of nothing. And movement. Constant movement in the shadows between structures. Things that might have been people if people were made of smoke and hunger. The train stopped with a sound like a sigh. Every passenger stood in perfect unison. The sudden motion after all that stillness made me flinch so hard I bit my tongue. Tasted blood, warm and copper and reassuringly real. They filed toward the exits without looking at me, without acknowledging my existence at all, just flowing past like water around a stone. I tried to stand, to follow, to do something other than sit frozen in that red velvet seat, but my body wouldn't respond, wouldn't even tremble. The woman in navy paused beside me. That absence of face turned down toward where I sat paralyzed. When she spoke, her voice had changed, became something almost gentle, almost sad. Last chance. Stay and become like us. Leave and wonder forever what you escaped. Both choices have their price. How? The word barely made it past my lips. How do I leave? Remember that you're alive. Remember hard enough. And the train remembers too. Then she was gone. They were all gone. Flowing out onto that impossible platform toward whatever waited in the breathing station. Leaving me alone in a car that suddenly felt vast as a cathedral. I closed my eyes and tried to remember. Not big things. Those felt too abstract. But small things. Real things. The way coffee tastes at 3 a.m. when you're working a double shift. The specific ache in your lower back after sitting in a dispatcher's chair for 10 hours. The smell of diesel fuel on your clothes. The weight of steel-toed boots. The 1,000 tiny discomforts and sensations that make up a living, breathing existence. The train shuddered, not like mechanical failure, like something organic trying to expel an irritant. The lights flickered, showing me glimpses of the car in different states. Sometimes pristine, sometimes rotted, sometimes full of passengers who weren't quite human anymore. Sometimes empty except for the bones. I remembered harder, my apartment with its water stain on the ceiling, my ex-wife's laugh, the scar on my knee from falling off my bike when I was 7. Every mundane, boring, beautiful detail of a life actually lived. The doors opened, not the passenger doors, but one I hadn't noticed before. An emergency exit that absolutely had not been there 30 seconds ago. Beyond it, I could see the Millbrook platform, my car still parked where I'd left it. The real world waiting just 20 feet away. But I had to walk those 20 feet. And with every step, the train pulled at me, whispered to me, showed me things. I saw myself in 10 years, still alone, still working nights, wondering if any of this had been real. I saw myself in 20, telling this story to people who smiled politely and thought about mental health resources. I saw myself old and dying, terrified that the train would be waiting on the other side. Worse, I saw what I was leaving behind, the simplicity of surrendering, the peace of becoming a passenger who never had to choose again, never had to wonder, never had to carry the weight of being the only person who knew the train existed. 15 feet, 10, 5. My hand touched the door frame, and I understood. The train doesn't take people, people take themselves. Every passenger had made a choice, somewhere, somewhen, had decided that stillness was better than struggle, that certainty was better than chaos, that riding forever was better than arriving. I threw myself through the doorway, hit the platform hard enough to skin my palms. Real pain, real blood, real cold October air that tasted like home. I scrambled to my feet, turned back. The train was already moving, gliding away with that impossible smoothness. Through the windows, I could see new passengers, the ones who'd boarded at the junction. They sat in the same stillness as the others, already forgetting they'd ever been anything else. As the last car passed, I saw something that made every hair on my body stand up. In the very last window, a figure that wasn't sitting, wasn't still. It stood pressed against the glass, palms flat, mouth open in what might have been a scream or a song. It was me, another me, one who'd made a different choice, one who'd stayed just a heartbeat too long. He looked exactly like I did, except for the eyes. The eyes were already beginning to fade, already accepting, already forgetting. The train vanished into the darkness. The platform lights flickered once, twice, then died, and I was standing in an overgrown lot beside a rusted historical marker that read, "Site of former Millbrook Station, demolished 1987. My car started on the first try. My GPS came back online like it had never been gone. And I drove until I found an all-night diner full of people and light and noise and everything the train wasn't. That was 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks of jumping at train whistles. 3 weeks of avoiding the railways I've worked my entire adult life. 3 weeks of telling myself it was a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and too much caffeine. I might have eventually convinced myself too. The human mind is remarkably good at explaining away the impossible, reshaping memories until they fit inside acceptable boundaries. I was already starting to doubt the details, starting to wonder if maybe I'd dozed off in my car and dreamed the whole thing. Then I found the ticket in my coat pocket. Not my work coat. The old one I'd grabbed from the back seat when the platform air turned cold. I was doing laundry, checking pockets, and my fingers closed on something that shouldn't have been there. A rectangle of cardstock so old it felt like it might crumble. But the printing was clear, sharp, like it had been issued minutes ago instead of decades. Millbrook Station. One-way passenger, D. Chen departure. When ready. Arrival, junction. Seat reserved, the worst part? The ticket was punched. That specific pattern conductors use to show a ticket's been validated. Used, accepted, but I never gave anyone my ticket. Never saw a conductor, never. That's when I noticed the date stamped in the corner. Not the date I'd seen the train. Not any date from the past. Tomorrow's date. I've spent the last 48 hours trying to destroy it. Fire doesn't touch it. Scissors can't cut it. Water rolls off like it's laminated, but it's not. It's just old cardstock that refuses to be anything but what it is. A reservation, a promise, a reminder that some doors, once opened, can never fully close. And now, sitting here recording this at 2 a.m., I can hear it, the whistle. Faint, distant, but getting closer. Not through space, but through possibility. Through the thinning walls between what is and what shouldn't be. Tomorrow night. I know where I'll be. Not because I want to, but because the ticket says so. Because I've already ridden. Already chosen. Already left my other self behind to fade in that last window. The train never arrives empty, but it always has room for one more. They told me everyone rides eventually. Most wait until their time. But some of us get impatient, get curious, get called early by lights that shouldn't shine and whistles that shouldn't blow. And once you've heard that call, once you've sat in those seats and seen those faces, you're already a passenger. You're just not on board yet. I'm leaving this recording on my cloud drive, set to publish in a week if I don't delete it. Maybe by then I'll be back, laughing at my own paranoia. Maybe I'll have found some logical explanation, some way to make sense of impossible things. Or maybe someone will find my car beside an empty lot where a station used to be. Maybe they'll wonder why I parked there, why I walked into nothing, why I disappeared on a Thursday night when the trains don't run anymore. But you'll know. You'll remember this story. And maybe, if you're very lucky, you'll never hear the whistle calling your name. Never see lights where no lights should be. Never find a ticket in your pocket with tomorrow's date and yesterday's promise. The sound is getting louder now. Not outside, but inside. In that place where certainty ends and possibility begins. Where every choice splits the world into what was and what might have been. Where trains that shouldn't exist carry passengers who've forgotten they were ever anything else. I have to go, have to see. Have to know if my other self is still standing at that window. Still pressing against glass that won't break. Still trying to warn a me who's already made his choice. But before I go, I need you to remember something. Need someone to know. The train isn't evil, isn't good, isn't anything but what it's always been. A choice, a doorway, a question that answering changes everything. Most people never see it, never hear it. Live their whole lives in the comfortable ignorance of a world with rules. But some of us, we notice the cracks, the places where reality wears thin, the moments when the impossible becomes inevitable. And once you've noticed, you can't unnotice, can't unhear the whistle, can't unsee the lights, can't pretend that somewhere, somewhen, there isn't a seat with your name on it. Waiting, patient, eternal. The ticket in my pocket is warm now, pulsing like something alive, like something eager. Tomorrow night, I'll stand on that platform again, and this time I don't think I'm coming back. But here's what haunts me most, what keeps me awake even when I'm not listening for trains. In that last window, my other self, he wasn't trying to escape, wasn't warning me away, he was waving goodbye, like he knew something I'm only beginning to understand. Like the choice was never really a choice at all. Like every path leads to the same platform, the same train, the same junction where all possibilities converge into one inevitable arrival. So I'll ask you what I've been asking myself for 3 weeks now. What would you do if you found yourself on an impossible platform, staring at an empty train, knowing that boarding meant becoming something else, but also knowing that not boarding meant spending the rest of your life wondering? Would you step on? Would you take your seat? Would you ride the train that never arrives empty, but always leaves full? Listen, do you hear it? That's not just my whistle anymore. That one's calling for you, sweet dreams. And whatever you do, don't look up the next time you hear a train in the distance. Don't wonder where it's going. Don't think about who might be riding, and definitely don't check your pockets. Some tickets you don't remember buying, but the train remembers you. The train always remembers, and it's very, very patient. Story number 4. The static hit my ears like broken glass on concrete. Sharp, jagged, wrong. I'd been scanning the AM frequencies for 3 hours straight, searching for that old jazz station my grandfather used to love. The one that played Coltrane at midnight and Duke Ellington at dawn. But all I found was static, until I hit 1440 AM. And in tomorrow's news, Sarah Chen of Portland, Oregon, will discover something in her attic that changes everything she thought she knew about her family. My hand froze on the dial. That was my name, my city. The voice continued, smooth as aged whiskey, completely matter-of-fact. The discovery will happen at 3:47 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, when a loose floorboard gives way beneath her left foot. I yanked my hand back like the radio had burned me. My heart hammered against my ribs. But curiosity is a dangerous thing, isn't it? Before I could stop myself, I was reaching for the dial again, fine-tuning the frequency. The static cleared. This has been tomorrow's news at the top of the hour. Stay tuned to KFTM, your station for what's next. KFTM, I'd never heard of it. And tomorrow, I didn't even have plans to go into my attic. Now, before you think I'm crazy, let me tell you the whole story. Because by the end of this, well, you might want to check your own radio. Just to be sure. My name is Sarah Chen, and I'm a perfectly rational person. I work as a data analyst for a tech company in Portland. I believe in facts, figures, and things that can be proven. Ghost stories make me roll my eyes. Conspiracy theories annoy me. But that radio broadcast, I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that voice predicting my future with the casual certainty of someone reading last week's weather report. By morning, I'd convinced myself it was a prank. Maybe someone at work found out about my vintage radio hobby and decided to mess with me. Still, I called in sick. At 3:30 p.m., I found myself standing at the bottom of my attic stairs, staring up at the pull-down ladder I hadn't touched in 2 years. This was ridiculous. I was letting some weird pirate radio station dictate my day. But what if... No, I turned away. Then I turned back. 3:43 p.m. I climbed the ladder. The attic smelled like old newspapers and forgotten dreams. Dust motes danced in the shaft of light from the single window. I stood there feeling foolish, checking my phone. 3:46 p.m. Nothing was going to happen. This was stupid. I took a step forward. The floorboard creaked. Another step. Crack! My left foot punched through rotted wood and I stumbled, catching myself on a beam. My phone clattered across the floor, its screen lighting up. 3:47 p.m. My hands shook as I pulled my foot free. Beneath the broken board was a metal box, its surface green with age. Inside, newspaper clippings, dozens of them. All about a radio tower fire in 1973. And in every photo, standing in the background like he didn't quite belong there, was my grandfather. But that wasn't the strangest part. The strangest part was the headline on top. Local man claims radio tower broadcast future events before mysterious fire. I sat back on my heels, dust swirling around me like snow. The article was yellowed, brittle. I read it 3 times before the words sank in. According to the report, a radio tower outside Portland had begun broadcasting news from the next day. At first, people thought it was a hoax, until the predictions started coming true. Small things at first, weather patterns, sports scores, then bigger events, a factory accident that hadn't happened yet, a missing child found in a location that hadn't been searched. The tower burned down 3 weeks later. Cause unknown. The broadcasts stopped, and my grandfather, he'd been the tower's night watchman. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Keep listening. KFTM. I scrambled down from the attic so fast I nearly fell. The vintage radio sat on my desk, innocent as a sleeping cat. I switched it on, static. I turned the dial slowly, carefully, like I was defusing a bomb. 14:30, 14:35, 14:39. Good evening, listeners. This is KFTM broadcasting tomorrow's news today. In our top story, Marcus Webb of Beaverton will receive a phone call at 11:17 p.m. that he should not answer. I grabbed a pen and started writing. Over the next week, I became obsessed. Every evening at 7 p.m., KFTM would broadcast tomorrow's news. Local stuff, mostly. Small predictions that always came true. Mrs. Patterson from 2 blocks over would find her missing cat in the storm drain. She did. The coffee shop on Division Street would run out of oat milk by 10 a.m. They did. A water main would break on Southwest Oak Street. It did. I started a notebook, green cover, like the metal box. I documented everything. Times, dates, predictions, outcomes. The pattern was perfect. KFTM was never wrong, but it was the personal predictions that really got to me. The station seemed to know things about specific people, private things. Tomorrow at 2:15 p.m., Jennifer Martinez will finally work up the courage to quit the job that's been slowly killing her soul. Robert Thompson will discover his daughter's secret at 4:33 p.m. when he accidentally opens the wrong drawer. Angela Ross will realize she's been living someone else's life when she finds the photograph tucked inside the library book. Who was broadcasting this? How did they know? I tried everything to trace the signal. I borrowed equipment from a friend who was into ham radio. I triangulated, measured signal strength, even tried to find the tower. Nothing. It was like KFTM didn't exist in physical space. But the predictions kept coming true. Then, on the 8th night, everything changed. "Tomorrow's special report," the voice said, and for the first time it sounded different. Tired, maybe, or sad. Sarah Chen of Portland, Oregon, will make a choice at 9:23 p.m. that will determine whether the broadcasts continue or finally end. The static swallowed the rest. I sat there, staring at the radio, my mouth dry as sand. A choice? What choice? I didn't sleep again that night. Or the next day. By 9 p.m., I was pacing my living room like a caged animal. What was I supposed to choose? How would I even know when? The doorbell rang, 9:22 p.m. I crept to the door, peered through the peephole. An old man stood on my porch, shoulders hunched against the rain. He was holding something. A radio. An old one, like mine. I opened the door. "Sarah Chen?" His voice was familiar. That whiskey-smooth tone. You're the broadcaster." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "My name is Thomas Webb, and I've been waiting for you to find that box in your attic for 30 years. I checked my phone, 9:23 p.m. "What's the choice?" I whispered. He held out the radio. "Take over the broadcasts, or let tomorrow remain a mystery." Thomas Webb sat in my kitchen, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee he hadn't touched. Up close, I could see the exhaustion etched into every line of his face. He looked like a man who hadn't slept properly in decades. "Your grandfather tried to destroy the tower," he said quietly. "Back in '73. He thought knowing the future was unnatural, dangerous. He set the fire. I thought of the newspaper clippings, the photos. But the broadcasts stopped." "No," Thomas shook his head. "They just moved. The tower was never the source, Sarah. It was just an amplifier. The real broadcaster is..." He gestured vaguely at the air around us. "Everywhere, nowhere. It needs a human conduit, someone to interpret the signals, to speak them into being. And you've been, every night for 30 years, 7 p.m. to midnight, reading tomorrow's news to whoever's listening." He laughed, but it sounded like breaking glass. "Do you know what it's like? Knowing what's coming but being unable to change it. I've broadcast car accidents, heart attacks, betrayals, even my own wife's death. Had to sit there and read it like it was nothing. Like it was just another news item. The radio he'd brought sat between us on the table, its surface reflecting the kitchen light like a dark mirror. Why can't you just stop? Because someone has to do it. That's the rule. The signal needs a voice, or it..." He paused, searching for words. "It builds up, like pressure. The last time someone tried to quit without passing it on, without finding a replacement. Well, let's just say the predictions started manifesting in other ways. Uglier ways." I thought of my notebook, all those predictions neatly documented. How many people know? More than you'd think, less than you'd hope. Some listeners think it's entertainment, others, they depend on it. Use it to avoid disasters, make better choices. His eyes met mine. Your grandfather knew. That's why he tried to burn it all down. but you can't destroy something that exists outside of normal space. You can only manage it. And you chose me because you're his granddaughter. Because you found the box exactly when you were supposed to. Because the signal, it likes you. I can feel it. I stared at the radio. Such a simple thing. Just circuits and speakers and the spaces in between. What happens if I say no? Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then I keep going until I can't anymore. And when I'm gone, the signal finds someone else. Someone who might not be as careful with the information. Careful? He leaned forward. I follow rules, Sarah. I don't broadcast deaths unless they're already preventable. I don't reveal secrets that would destroy lives. I keep the worst of tomorrow to myself. But the next person might not be so ethical. Imagine someone using tomorrow's news for profit, for power, for cruelty. The kitchen felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in. Show me, I said. Show me how it works. Thomas smiled, that sad, tired smile, and reached for the radio. The moment his fingers touched the dial, the air in my kitchen changed. It became thick, electric, like the moments before a thunderstorm. The radio hummed to life without being plugged in. Listen, he whispered. At first, just static. Then, beneath it, something else. Voices, hundreds of them, thousands, all talking at once, a cacophony of tomorrows. My head spun, trying to process it. Focus, Thomas said. Pick one thread, one voice, pull it forward. I closed my eyes, let the sound wash over me. And there, like a single instrument in an orchestra, I heard it. Tomorrow at 6:45 a.m., David Park will miss his bus. This delay will save his life, as the earlier bus will. I jerked back, eyes flying open. No, I don't want to know that. That's the burden, Thomas said softly. Knowing when to speak and when to stay silent. The signal shows you everything. You choose what to broadcast. My hands were shaking. How do you stand it? By remembering that sometimes knowing tomorrow can help. That mother who finds her child because she heard where to look. The family that evacuates before the fire. The woman who finally leaves her abuser because she knows tomorrow is the day she'll find the strength. He pushed the radio toward me. It's not all darkness, Sarah. Sometimes tomorrow brings hope. I touched the radio, just a fingertip against the dial. The voices flooded in again, but this time I could almost understand them, almost parse the flow of time yet to come. Take the weekend, Thomas said, standing. Think about it. But Sarah, the signal is getting stronger. It needs a new voice soon. He left his radio on my table and walked out into the rain. I sat there until dawn, listening to the whispers of tomorrow and trying to decide if knowledge was a gift or a curse. I spent 3 days with Thomas's radio. 3 days of hearing tomorrow's news whether I wanted to or not. The signal didn't care that I hadn't officially accepted the job. It pushed through anyway, filling my dreams with predictions, my waking hours with whispers of what was to come. I knew that Mrs. Nguyen would win $50 on a scratch-off lottery ticket. I knew that the teenager down the street would finally ask his crush to prom, and she'd say yes. I knew that my best friend would call me crying at 3 a.m. because her husband had been lying about working late. That last one almost broke me. Jessica and Mark seemed so happy. Should I warn her? Could I? No. Thomas's rules echoed in my head. Some futures were fixed. Interference only made things worse. By Sunday night, I was exhausted. The weight of tomorrow was crushing me, and I hadn't even started broadcasting yet. How had Thomas done this for 30 years? I called him. I need to see where you broadcast from. An hour later, I was following his taillights through the rain, out past the city limits, into the hills where cell phone signals went to die. We drove for what felt like forever, the roads getting narrower, the trees pressing closer until finally, there it was, a radio tower, skeletal against the night sky, but wrong. It looked burnt, twisted, like someone had tried to destroy it and failed. "This is," I started, "the original tower, the one your grandfather burned." Thomas got out of his car, pulling his coat tight against the wind. Or tried to burn. It rebuilt itself, piece by piece. Took about 10 years, but it came back. We climbed the fence, easy enough, since the metal was warped and gap-toothed, and approached the tower's base. There was a small building there, concrete and steel, with a heavy door that opened to Thomas's touch. Inside, a single room, a desk, a microphone. Banks of equipment that looked both ancient and impossibly advanced. The walls were covered in notebooks, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Every broadcast, Thomas said, every prediction, all documented. I pulled one down at random, 1994. The handwriting was different, younger, steadier. I found an entry. "Tomorrow, Louise Baker will find out she's pregnant. The child will grow up to cure." I slammed the notebook shut. Some things shouldn't be known. "The hardest part," Thomas said, settling into the broadcast chair, "is the big events, the ones you want to scream about, wars, disasters, pandemics. But you can't. The signal won't let you. It only allows personal stories, individual tomorrows. Why?" He shrugged. "Maybe because the big picture is too much for any one person to carry. Maybe because individual choices are what really matter. Or maybe," he looked at me, "maybe the signal itself doesn't see that far. Maybe tomorrow is all it knows." 7 p.m. approached. I watched Thomas prepare, checking equipment, adjusting levels. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, but I could see the tremor in them. The exhaustion. "Last chance to run," he said. I thought about my normal life, my data analysis job, my predictable days, my safe, small existence where tomorrow was always a mystery and that was okay. Then I thought about all the notebooks on the walls, all those tomorrows, documented and preserved. All those lives touched by knowledge they shouldn't have but desperately needed. "Show me how to run the equipment," I said. Thomas smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from him, and began to teach. The broadcast that night was simple. Small predictions, safe ones. A lost dog that would find its way home. A surprise gift that would arrive in the mail. A job interview that would go better than expected. But as Thomas spoke into the microphone, I heard the other voices. The darker predictions hovering just beneath. The accidents waiting to happen. The hearts preparing to break. The last conversations that no one knew would be their last. "You learn to filter," Thomas said during a commercial break that played from nowhere. "To choose the stories that help rather than harm. It's not about playing God, it's about being a lighthouse, warning of the rocks when you can, celebrating the safe harbors when they come." At midnight, he signed off. "This has been KFTM, your station for tomorrow's news. Stay tuned, stay safe, and remember, tomorrow is always coming, whether you're ready or not." The moment the broadcast ended, the equipment began to power down on its own. The voices faded. The tower above us settled into silence. "So," Thomas said, "what's your decision?" I looked around the small room, at the notebooks, at the microphone, at the responsibility I never asked for but somehow had always been heading toward. "Teach me everything," I said. "Every rule, every exception, every way to make this curse into something like a blessing." He gripped my shoulder. "Thank you." We spent the rest of the night going through procedures, protocols, the unwritten rules of tomorrow. By dawn, I was as ready as I'd ever be. "One more thing," Thomas said as we prepared to leave. He pulled out a small key. Safety deposit box at First National. Everything you need to know about the signal's origin is in there. But Sarah... He paused. Maybe don't open it right away. Maybe give yourself time to adjust first. Some knowledge changes you in ways you can't come back from. I took the key. It was warm, like it had been sitting in sunlight. When do I start? Tomorrow night, 7 p.m. The signal will call you when it's time. He walked to his car, then turned back. Your grandfather would be proud. He always said the family gift would skip a generation. Guess he was right. Gift? The ability to hear tomorrow without going mad. Not everyone can do it, Sarah. The signal, it chooses carefully. As I drove home, the sun rising behind me, I wondered what I'd gotten myself into. But deep down, in the part of me that had always known this day would come, I felt something like peace. Tomorrow would always be a mystery to most people, but not to me, not anymore. I'm recording this on an old cassette tape, hiding it in the same box where I found those newspaper clippings. If you're listening to this, if you found this, then maybe you're the next one. Maybe the signal is calling to you too. 6 months. That's how long I've been the voice of KFTM. 183 broadcasts, thousands of predictions, some beautiful, some terrible. All true. I've learned things. The signal is stronger during thunderstorms. It's clearest at 3 a.m. It sometimes shows me the same tomorrow from different angles, like it's unsure which version will come to pass. And sometimes it shows me things that aren't tomorrow at all. Things that might be next week, next year, next decade. I haven't opened Thomas's safety deposit box yet. I'm not ready for that knowledge, but I know it's there, waiting, like tomorrow itself. The hardest part isn't the bad news. It's the good news I can't share. The lottery numbers I can't reveal. The job opportunities I can't mention. The love that's waiting just around the corner for someone who's given up hope. But I follow the rules. I broadcast what the signal allows. I document everything in the notebooks. I maintain the tower, even though I'm pretty sure it maintains itself. And late at night, when the broadcast is done and the voices fade, I sometimes pick up my regular radio, the one that started all this. I turn the dial slowly, carefully, listening for other stations like mine. Other voices sharing tomorrow's news. I've found 3 so far. One in New Mexico, one in Maine, one somewhere in Canada. We're out there. The keepers of tomorrow. The voices in the static. And now you know we exist. So let me ask you something, and think carefully before you answer. Have you been hearing whispers in the white noise? Have your dreams been showing you things that haven't happened yet? Has your radio been picking up signals that shouldn't exist? Because if you have, if you are, then maybe you're like me. Maybe you have the gift, or the curse, depending on how you look at it. Maybe tomorrow is calling your name, and maybe, just maybe, it's time for you to answer. This is Sarah Chen, signing off from KFTM, your station for tomorrow's news. Stay tuned, stay safe, and remember, tomorrow is always closer than you think. Static silence, and then, next time you're scanning the radio dial late at night, listen carefully. You might just hear your own tomorrow waiting in the static. And if you do, well, don't say I didn't warn you. Sweet dreams, listeners. And don't forget to subscribe. You'll want to hear what happens next. Now, listen. The whispers, and make a decision whether we are going to cooperate with the whispers or we just want to skip them. But actually, no one can skip these whispers. If you walk away from them, they will run towards you until they reach you. They confront you, make you pay, make you suffer the same thing they suffer. There is no escape from them. If you want to escape, help them, so they can have peace, and you also can have it, help, or you will ask for help soon. So, the end of today's video has arrived. Share your personal horror experiences in the comments. Also, comment the part of the story that you find the most horror and terrifying. If you like this video, leave a like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Also, ring the bell icon so you don't miss the upcoming videos. Remember, don't run from whispers, because they follow you. They know you. They want you to listen, just confront them. Now, sleep well, or should I say, have a haunted night.